So I want to explain how this came to be and how special this person is to me. So right a few months before I became plant-based, or excuse me, a few months after I became plant-based, I didn't know what I was doing, right? I hadn't taken a course yet. And I was doing all this Googling, as we do, and I came across this website, Food Revolution Network. I was like, oh, what's this? Start looking into it, and I find they have a whole summit, right? A 10-day summit that's completely free with like the most incredible people around the world. All free information. So I watched this for 10 days. I was glued to my computer because it's online. And I found so many things. It blew my mind what I didn't know, because I had been studying nutrition, casually. And I thought, how do I not know all this? This is just earth-shattering. I can't believe all of this stuff that I've never heard about. I mean, it's where I found out about GMOs for the first time. It literally changed my complete perspective. And I'm watching all these people, I'm listening to these presenters, and I just said to myself, I want to work with these people. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. I aspire to be these people who are changing lives, who are helping to save lives. And they're doing it because they care, not because, they're going to be famous, they're going to be an actual rock star, or on TV. They're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. These are my heroes. And so this weekend, this is the culmination of that. This weekend is literally a dream come true, because I got to work with people, and I'm still working this weekend with people who I believe are my heroes. They're doing the work that makes a difference, not for making a buck, making a difference. And so the man I'm going to bring up next is the co-founder of the Food Revolution Network. They have over 800,000 members now. Okay, when I started watching, I think it was a couple 100,000. It's massive. It has grown and taken off like you can't believe, and they are changing the world in unimaginable ways. He is the kindest person. Without him, without his support, without him helping me for no other reason than he is just a good person, I would not be standing here.
I've been introduced a lot of ways before, but that was really special. Thank you so much. What an event, huh? We all know intellectually that food is the foundation of health, and that for many people today, food is also the foundation of disease. But at the end of the day, cancer doesn't care how much you know. But cancer does care what you eat. Heart disease doesn't care how many studies you've read about, but it does care what's on your plate when you sit down for dinner. So my interest, I'm getting some feedback here. Can we turn the mic down just a bit, maybe? I don't want to hurt anybody's ears. My interest is in how we can apply what we're learning so that we can get the results that we want. And my interest is also in how we can apply what we're learning so we can be a part of a transformation on this planet. Because, one of the things that really bugs me is how elitist the food movement can be. There are a lot of people in the world who don't have the money or the time to finesse which type of heirloom tomato is the most nutritious, or which brand of MCT oil they should put in their coffee. Because they're just trying to survive, and if they can get food in front of their kids, then that's success, right? And so in this context, we have systems in place that systematically condemn the poor to nutritional disasters. We have systems in place that make it as if you are being fined for wearing your seatbelt because you have to pay extra and work extra hard just to do the right thing for yourself and your family. Why is it that some people think Whole Foods take your whole paycheck? That organic food can cost double? Why is it that buying local, fresh, healthy food from people next door can cost so much more than something mass-produced that's been shipped thousands of miles and put in plastic and has millions of dollars of advertising being spent on it? There's nothing inherently more cost-effective about shipping stuff all around the world and packing it with chemicals and making it in factories. But we have a system in place that systematically favors mass production over local small scale, that systematically favors chemical-intensive agriculture, that favors torturing animals in factory farms, that favors paying farmers the lowest possible amount so that the life expectancy for farm workers in the United States is 49 years because they're exposed to so many chemicals and so many hazards on the job. We have systems in place that have led us to the outcome we've got, which is a society in which a third of our kids are expected to get diabetes in their lifetime, a world in which 14 million people will die of heart disease this year, 8 million of cancer, and a world in which our climate is destabilized, in which it is normal and institutionalized for animals to be tortured in factory farms as we pump them full of antibiotics and hormones. We have created a toxic food culture in which you have to work extra hard and think outside the box and come to conferences to be able to learn how to do what should be basic for everybody. Recently, I had a similar experience to what Gina was describing. My own aunt was going through chemotherapy for a serious cancer. She didn't know if she would live or die. She asked her oncologist about food. He also said, "Oh, it doesn't matter, eat whatever you want." He thought he was being kind. He thought he was helping her have an easier time in a difficult stretch. But he wasn't. Because at the end of the day, she wanted to live. And now, she thinks that food doesn't matter all that much. It's an extra. It's a frill. But we know that food is fundamental. That what we eat can chart the course of our destiny. That what we put on our plates and how we nourish our bodies shifts the course of our entire lives and shifts the course of our entire planet. Raise your hand if you want to live in a world in which animals are treated with respect and free from excess cruelty. Raise your hand if you would like to see doctors learn about nutrition in medical school. Raise your hand if you would like to see kids learn about nutrition in elementary school. Raise your hand if you'd like to see hospitals serve healthy food. Raise your hand if you would like it to be more accessible and affordable to choose healthy foods. Yeah. Raise your hand if you think you know why I'm asking all these questions. Because they're all connected. Because to me, the food revolution is about standing up for healthy, ethical, and sustainable food for everyone who eats. See, we aren't just isolated consumers who live in our own little box and our own little cubicle and do our own thing. What we do sends out ripples. It has an impact. So when you choose to participate in a new food economy, when you choose to participate and vote with your dollars and your life and your choices and your own knife and fork for the world you want for yourself, you also contribute to a healthier world for everybody. Because when we choose to go more organic, we don't just take less pesticides into our body, we contribute to less pesticides being sprayed on farm workers and being sprayed on our planet and contaminating our water and our air and our soil. When we choose to go humane or vegetarian or vegan, when we step away from factory farming systems, we are saying no to chickens that have their beaks cut off so they don't peck each other to death when they're driven crazy. We're saying no to veal calves being stripped away from their mothers at first day of life and kept in a pen so small they can never even turn around or take a step in their entire miserable lives before they're killed. We're saying no to a system that systematically tortures animals. You know, if you or I treated a dog or a cat this way, we'd go to jail. In every state in this country, we have laws against cruelty to animals. But in every state in this country, we specifically exempt animals raised for food, so long as what's done is the industry norm. Well, I'll tell you, and we all know the industry norm is cruel. It is inhumane. It is out of step with our basic conscience as human beings, which is why many states now have ag-gag laws that make it illegal to take pictures inside factory farms, so we won't know what's really happening. But we do know. We're learning. Courageous people have gone in and taken pictures and shown us what's going on, and people are horrified. 94% of the American public says that animals raised for food, if animals are going to be raised for food, should be free from cruelty, should be treated humanely. We don't want this. Do you know 94% of Americans don't agree about much of anything at all? You know, I think, more than 6% of Americans think the moon landing was faked. More than 6% of Americans, probably think just about anything under the sun. More than 6% of Americans may think that Congress is doing an okay job. But when it comes to animal cruelty, we say, no, we don't want to participate in this kind of an inhumane system. And so I believe that we have not only the facts on our side, but also human conscience on our side. Because most people that I know want to live. Most people that I know want their kids to have a livable world. Most people that I know want to see their families and their communities healthy and well. We are sick of being sick. We are fed up with toxic food, and we're hungry for a change. And we are creating that change, which thrills me. Recently, I had the pleasure of speaking with Kate McGowie-Smith. She's in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Kate was, about 10 years ago, severely diabetic. She had diabetic retinopathy. She lost her sight. She was over 100 pounds overweight. She was hooked up to an oxygen tank, unable to breathe without a 20-pound oxygen tank she carried everywhere. She was blind, and she was unable to walk. She had 3 small children. Her doctors told her she should have a good will. They didn't tell her a thing about food. Fortunately, Kate watched a movie called Forks Over Knives. Some of you may have heard of this film. Yes. So she watched the film, she followed its advice, she radically changed her diet. She went sugar, oil, salt-free. She went completely plant-based. She ended up teaching herself to cook while strapped to a 20-pound oxygen tank, unable to walk, and blind. She snacked on greens with flavored vinegar 6 times a day. She knew her life was on the line, and she did not want to die. Kate got results, tremendous results. Her eyesight came back. Her mobility came back. She lost 120 pounds. Today she walks and hikes. She can see. She's a health coach and advocate, helping other people make changes. The ripples went out to her family. Her husband joined the journey with her. He reversed his diabetes. Her son had been morbidly obese. He lost 60 pounds. Kate still suffers from kidney failure because her kidneys were so damaged, so she has only 12% function. But she hasn't needed dialysis, to her doctor's shock, because she's living such a clean lifestyle. She doesn't know what her future will hold. She doesn't have a lot of money. She said to me, I'm not expecting to be able to leave a lot for my kids when I go, when my time comes, but I'm leaving them something a lot more important than money, which is the gift of health. And at the end of the day, I think that's even better. Talking to Kate really moved me because, sometimes I can complain about life. I can get down in the dumps and be frustrated by things and, complain about all sorts of stuff. But my problems look so small compared to when I think about Kate on a 20-pound oxygen tank, unable to walk, unable to see, teaching herself to cook and snacking on greens 6 times a day. And I think about her courage and her determination and her will to live And I look at what she's created for her life and the transformation she has experienced, and I say there's hope for all of us. No matter how bleak things get, no matter how dark the night may seem, no matter how painful it can get, there is always hope. There's an old saying that pain pushes and vision pulls. Some of us are motivated by pain, by fear, by suffering, by loss. Others of us are motivated by vision, by dreams, by possibilities, by what we really want for our lives and for our world. Whatever it is that motivates you, I want to honor that motivation, and I want to light a fire in it that says, this stuff is real, this stuff works, this stuff matters, and you can do it. In my own family, we've had an interesting experience of this. Some of you may have heard the story. My grandfather, Irvin Robbins, founded a little ice cream company called Baskin-Robbins, and it went on to, 31 flavors, become the world's largest ice cream company. And my dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. He was groomed from early childhood to one day join in running the family company. But when he was in his early 20s, he was offered that chance, and he said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to follow his own rocky road, as we say in our family. He ended up moving with my mom to a little island off the coast of Canada where they built a one-room log cabin, grew most of their own food, practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day, and of course named their kid Ocean. Then, some years later, my dad wound up researching the food industry out of which he had grown and becoming a best-selling author with the publication of Diet for a New America, which came out in 1987. He became a spokesperson for food as an opportunity to take a stand for our health and for the world that we want. And the media had a lot of fun with the story. They called him the rebel without a cone. They also, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, if any of you remember the show, Robin Leach called him the prophet of nonprofit. So my dad was kind of a hero to a lot of people, still is. He's inspired a whole generation of health food activists. John Mackey, founder of Whole Foods, told him, I don't think we would have been in business without you. And my dad's work inspired a lot of people, including, as fate would have it, his father. So my grandpa ate the standard American diet plus a double scoop of ice cream throughout his whole life. His brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, died of heart disease at the age of 54. So he had watched his dear friend, his brother-in-law and business partner, my dad's Uncle Bert, pass away. My dad's Uncle Bert was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history. He had a family he loved, he had a business he loved, but he didn't have his health. And so he left his wife a widow and his kids fatherless. My grandpa had seen that, but he continued to deny any relationship between diet and health. And then when he was in his early 70s, he was facing serious heart problems, diabetes, weight issues. His doctors told him he didn't have more than a couple years to live unless he read this book and followed its advice, and they handed him a copy of Diet for a New America, without making it clear whether or not they knew there was a relationship between the book's author and their patient. My grandpa didn't tell them that he knew the guy who wrote that book. But he read it, and he ended up following its advice. He said he wasn't a card-carrying vegetarian, perhaps relating vegetarianism to the Communist Party at the time, but he did say that he went plant-based, and he gave up most animal products. He gave up ice cream, he gave up all sugar, he ate a lot more fruits and whole foods and vegetables, and he got predictable results. He lost 30 pounds, he got off all of his diabetes and high blood pressure medications, and his golf game improved 7 strokes. My grandpa was very happy. He lived another 19 more healthy years. And I remember when I was a teenager, my dad and I were running marathons together, and we were out training one morning visiting my grandpa, and he was out at this point. He had had his transformation, and he was taking his dog for an hour-and-a-half walk every morning. And we jogged past him, and he's cheering us on as we're jogging by, and I was thinking to myself, this is what healthy food can do. 3 generations out enjoying life, right? On his deathbed in his 90s, my grandpa said to my dad and I, we were with him on the last day of his life, and he said to my dad, he said, when you left Baskin-Robbins, I'll be honest, I thought you were crazy. And I might have been right. But thank God some of us have lived long enough to learn a few new things. And then he looked at both of us and he said, I'm so proud of both of you because you're helping people be healthy. And that's making the world better. And that's a really good thing. And he just smiled, and I could feel his pride and his love, and I carry that with me. And I think in some ways, his courage to make that transformation in his life is really admirable. Maybe even in some ways more admirable than all his business achievements. Do you have any idea how much courage it takes for somebody who is that invested in the food status quo, in the belief that there's no link between diet and health, who's brought tons and tons and tons of sugar and butterfat into the world to give up ice cream? And to have an open mind and to follow the advice of his renegade son, and then to acknowledge it when he gets those kinds of results? Because to him, life was more important than being right. I would wish the same for all of us, that life would be more important than being right, more important than the preservation of the ideologies and beliefs we've had up to this point, so that we could always have an open mind, so we could always be learning. You know, there's the old saying that in the world, in times of rapid change in the world, those who are learned the world belongs to those who are learning, while those who are learned are expertly prepared for a world that no longer exists. So we've all been prepared for a world that was, by the ideas and institutions that were shaped by the world that was, but the world that is and the world that will be has never yet been. So we are constantly learning and discovering new things about our bodies, about our health, about our planet, about how we live in this world, and about what is possible for us as human beings. I believe that your body was exquisitely designed, not just to survive or cope or somehow make it through another day, not just to prevent disease, but to thrive. You deserve to love your life. You deserve not just to be free from pain. You know, ibuprofen or morphine will get you there. You deserve to have pleasure, to have vitality, to enjoy inhabiting this precious body on this precious planet. You deserve to have a clear mind, to be present, to inhabit your days. Life is not just an unending sequence of survival. It is an opportunity to live, to love, to embody. And to me, the food revolution is about that. It's about doing what we were born for. There's the saying that the 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you discover why you were born. I'm interested in helping each of us to discover and live why we were born, so we can truly, truly participate in the transformation, in the awakening, in the healing that I believe humanity is longing for in these times. We are surrounded by so much pain and suffering in the world, so much darkness. And at times, it can feel depressing or unconfrontable, the immensity of what we are up against. Many people become cynical, filled with despair. We narrow our gaze. We close our hearts. We focus on what's immediately in front of us. We try to look out for number one, because looking out for everyone feels way too overwhelming. And we feel like drops not just in a bucket, but in a sea. But what I want to say is that with your food choices, you have the opportunity to take a stand in a way that creates congruency and integrity, so that you know that what you are bringing into your body is aligned with the world that you want. And when you do that, I think there is a potency, and I think there is a vitality, and I think there's a power that enters into your blood, that enters into your life, that gives you a greater sense of meaning and purpose. And that's part of what I want for you as well. to know that we are part of something powerful and vast that is shifting the course of history on this planet. Did you know that in the last 18 years, this century, the number of farmers' markets in this country has quadrupled? Did you know that in the last 18 years, the number of community-supported agriculture programs has also quadrupled? That sales of organically grown foods and sales of non-GMO certified foods have been exploding. Non-GMO has gone from nothing 7 years ago to $25 billion in sales in this country. 7 years. We are part of something that is shifting the course of the way that food is grown, the way that it's processed, the way that it's prepared, the way that it's consumed all over the world. If you want to be vegan, not that long ago, you had to really struggle. Now there are vegan options in all kinds of stores, even some fast food chains. It's changing fast. When I was a kid, you couldn't get tofu or soy milk in Safeway. Now you can find almond milk and hemp milk and cashew milk, and there's probably about 7 or 8 different varieties of non-dairy milks in just about every supermarket in the country. Things are changing. Fluid milk consumption has dropped by 50%. The cow kind. Yeah. And I celebrate that because to me, I translate that to less kids that are going to get diabetes. I translate that to less people that are going to have to show up in Dr. Khan's operating room for heart surgery. I translate that to less cows that are going to live in abject misery, have their calves taken away at birth, going to be at 4-legged milk pumps. I translate that to less forest that'll be chopped down or burnt so we can create grazing land for cattle or land on which we can grow genetically engineered soybeans that we feed to cattle. I translate that into a more stable climate for future generations. More topsoil for future generations. More water for future generations, because it is all connected. The production of animal foods is very resource intensive, because when you go up the food chain, by definition, you lose efficiency. There's just no way around it. As hard as the industry tries to increase efficiency by doing things like making it so the animals can't move, so they don't burn up excess calories, there is nevertheless the reality that when you feed food to an animal, a lot of that food is going to turn into hoof and hide and bone and feathers. It's going to turn into energy they use to burn and move around, and heat they produce in their bodies, etc., which means we're going to waste a lot of those calories. When we eat food directly as human beings, we contribute to more food being available for human beings on this planet, which means that we're less taxing of our forests and our land and our ecosystems and our water. In the state of California, we use more water for animal agriculture than all of our cities, swimming pools, businesses, municipal use, drinking water, toilets, showers, everything else combined. And we import most of our meat in this state. In the state of California, every year, we export alfalfa to China to feed their livestock, and the water that goes into that alfalfa is more than all of San Francisco uses, so that the Chinese can feed their livestock in factory farms. It's a bizarre system. And for those of us who care about the future of life on this planet, I think it's an incredibly hopeful reality that the same food choices that will be beneficial for our own health and well-being will also contribute to a more humane and a more sustainable planet. Recently, I got to speak with a man named Craig Watts. He was a chicken farmer from North Carolina. Any of you ever heard of Craig Watts before? Okay, well, you will now. So Craig Watts was a chicken farmer, and he'd been 20 years raising hundreds of thousands of chickens in the Purdue system. So basically, he put up barns, he had a farm, Purdue provided him with the birds and the feed and the systems, and they bought all of his chickens at the end. Basically, he was kind of working for them in a sense, but he felt like a freelancer. He got about 5 cents per pound for the chicken meat that he produced in this way. And he, after 20 years, was still in debt from all the setup costs, so he wasn't making a lot of money. He felt really stressed. He did everything they told him to do. He won multiple awards from Purdue, top producer awards. He was a poster boy of how to do it right. His contract with Purdue forbade him from ever allowing his chickens to see the light of day or to have any fresh air. He was not allowed to open windows or doors or to let any light, natural light in, because that would stimulate the chickens, which is bad for feed conversion ratio. The chickens were given less than 1 square foot per bird. Now, a chicken's natural wingspan is about 34 inches. This means that the birds could not, on average, raise 1 wing up. They were driven crazy, of course. The industry's response, because they try to peck each other to death because they can't have their natural pecking order, is to cut off their beaks. The chickens were morbidly obese. This is how they've been bred. If you took a human baby and they grew at this rate, by the age of 3 months, they would weigh 600 pounds. The chickens were so obese that they couldn't walk. So they would lie, unable to walk, in manure. Manure that was changed every 3 years. So they're lying in a pile of their own feces and the feces of generations of birds before them, developing sores, their feathers are falling off, and 5% of the birds lying in that barn were dead. They're surrounded by the corpses of their fellow chickens. So, in this situation, Craig didn't like it, but he was trying to make ends meet. Then he sees an ad on TV, Jim Purdue, third generation head of the Purdue brand, saying how our chickens are all cage-free, and we treat them really well. They're humane, they're USDA certified. We take good care of our birds, just like any farmer should, showing a very clean barn that's just been cleaned with lots and lots of space. And Craig said that was when he couldn't take it anymore. He said, now, if I don't speak up, I'm not only cruel, but I'm also a liar. So he invited an animal welfare organization to come in with cameras to his barn and film what was actually happening in his award-winning Purdue Visits It Every Week facility. And then he shared this on video, and millions of people saw it, and it went viral. And Purdue was not pleased. Because one of the things that Mr. Watts said in the video, he said, I'm no psychologist, but I'll tell you one thing, these birds are not happy. And I'm not a vet, but I'll tell you another thing, they're not healthy. And he showed what was really happening. Well, Purdue tried to punish him by saying that he was a bad apple. This wasn't typical. He showed the contract that said that the birds recommended how densely populated they should be and said they should never be allowed to see light or have any fresh air. So Purdue just kind of tried to hope it would go away, but Craig wasn't done. So a little while later, he left the chicken farming business. He now works as a consultant, helping factory farm operators to change, to shift away from industrialized agricultural models and practice a more humane, sustainable system. Talking with Craig was an incredible privilege because this is a man who lived in this system his entire life, and he had the courage to speak the truth and now to participate in working for change. You know, you don't have to be an animal rights activist or a vegetarian or vegan to find the kinds of systems in which Craig was raising his birds to be appalling. And to say, no, I don't want to participate in that with my money. I don't want to vote for that kind of a world with my dollars or with my stomach. You know, it might be cheap. It might be tasty. But it's also brutally cruel. And at the end of the day, when we treat animals in this way, the chickens come home to roost, so to speak. You know, our livestock industry uses 80% of our antibiotics. Now, when I was a baby, when I was 3 months old, I had antibiotics. One of only 2 times in my life that I've had them, but I got a very high fever, and I believe that an antibiotic saved my life. I think that in the right place, they can be really useful. How many of you have ever felt that antibiotics may have made a difference in your life in a positive way? Okay. Now, we know they're overused. We know that they're overprescribed. We know that they can do uncharted damage to the gut bacteria, and that needs to be taken into consideration. I'm not advocating antibiotics indiscriminately used, but I am saying that in their right place, they can be lifesavers. And unfortunately, that may be harder and harder to accomplish because we have antibiotic-resistant bacteria growing at a terrifying rate. Last year in the United States, 20,000 Americans died from antibiotic-resistant bacteria. These are people that had conditions that would have been universally treated and cured by antibiotics only a matter of years ago. Worldwide, we are looking at the possibility of, within a generation, a post-antibiotic world because we are breeding so much antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So in that context, I submit again that in the United States, 80% of our antibiotic use is given to livestock and not to humans. That worldwide, it's more than 2/3 of all antibiotics used on the face of the earth are given to animals and not to humans. And this is part of our industrial system in which we keep animals alive under deplorable conditions by giving them antibiotics with every dose of feed. The antibiotics also produce more weight gain in the animals. This system is not only cruel, but it's also turned our factory farms into biological weapons factories. We are literally breeding pathogenic bacteria in massive quantities that threatens the lives of tens of thousands, in the future hundreds of thousands, if not millions of us. And right now we're facing the consequences of that. So one of our goals in Food Revolution Network is we want an end to the routine use of antibiotics in factory farms. I think that is something that a lot of people could get behind. And if we did make that shift, it would also shift the way that some of the animals are being treated right now. Because some of the most extreme cruelty practices would have to be shifted in order to keep the animals alive long enough even to reach the point of slaughter. So I want to invite you to consider, as you look at what it means to be plant-based, what it means to base your diet around real, whole, natural plant foods, I want to invite you to consider yourself taking a stand for your own sovereignty and well-being, and also a food revolutionary. To recognize that you are part of something beautiful, something profound, that is helping humanity to be more aligned with our integrity as a species, in our relationship with other species, in our relationship with the earth itself, that we are participating in something that can help uplift the health of children, help uplift the health of our elderly, help uplift the health of our most vulnerable. Because that, I think, is a dream that all of us carry at some level. We want to be the change we want to see in the world. We want to participate in making things more beautiful, more ethical, more vibrant for ourselves and all that we love. And that is our opportunity and our invitation. And I think as we learn the truth, also perhaps it is our call to action. So I want to have some time for questions and dialogue with you. And actually, let me check the time here. Where are we? 3:05. Oh, good. We got time. So we have till, is Gina in here? I think we have till 3:30 for this session. So I just want to confirm that. Okay, I guess we do. So if you have a question or a comment, I'd love if you could raise your hand and we can have a little interaction together. Yes. Okay, animal rights groups and plastic and wow. Okay, thanks. So animal rights groups, yes, I mean, we've worked with, Farm Sanctuary and Mercy for Animals most directly in Food Revolution Network, but I have so much appreciation. Speaking of Mercy for Animals, one of the things they've done is they've sent undercover investigators in. Now, let me give you a picture here, what that means. So these are people who love animals. They're passionate about animals. They take jobs in slaughterhouses, in factory farms, working for months, cutting the heads off of pigs and chickens and cows, kicking them, forcing them, and doing all the things that they're forced to do in these positions, treating them with the same cruelty of all their coworkers, specifically so that when the time is right, they can pull out a camera and take pictures and document what's happening. they risk their livelihood, they risk persecution, lawsuits, they risk they have tremendous personal risk, and they're doing things that they abhor so that they can tell the truth. I think these are some of the heroes of our times. So I just want to honor all the people who have taken that risk and taken that stand so that we can know what's really happening in these systems. One of the things that Mercy for Animals has also documented is that many of the people who work in our slaughterhouses and factory farming systems are suffering from PTSD, because it takes a toll on you to bash the heads off of other sentient beings all day, or to kill creatures, or to treat them with this kind of cruelty and to normalize it. No one wants to do that. So a lot of the people in these systems are themselves destitute and poor, and a lot of them are suffering a great deal emotionally as a result. They also recognize that a lot of the animals are suffering from PTSD and can be rehabilitated. Farm Sanctuary has shown how animals that have been rescued from these factory farms can actually learn to love human beings again, can actually learn to forgive. They're incredibly forgiving creatures once they're treated with respect and once they're given safety and support. And that just, I don't know about you, but for me, that just touches my heart so deeply to know that every single one of these creatures is actually capable of healing, of love, of trusting humans again on the other side. And I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but it definitely intensifies the reality. And as a human being, it just makes me all the more committed to wanting to shift the systems, and certainly not wanting to fund them, right? Plastics. So plastic is not good for you. So, we've heard about BPA, bisphenol A, and the endocrine disruption and the cancer-causing potentials, and the ways that there are quite a few studies that have shown that BPA is very harmful. So then a new generation of plastics came out, made with other chemicals, and now we're finding out that they're just as bad or maybe even worse. So bottom line is, I try to minimize my exposure to plastic, and so we replaced all our food storage containers. We use glass. I don't mind a plastic lid as long as it's not touching the food, but we use glass, and then we use metal with silicone seals so that we can snap it on for traveling, and so I can take lunch or soup or whatever with me and it won't spill. But that's just one shift we made, and we try to minimize our use. I still store produce in plastic bags because that's kind of how it comes from the store. But I'm not totally settled on that. But I try to minimize my exposure to plastic. I also never put plastic in the dishwasher or expose it to direct sunlight. So if you have any plastic containers at all in your life, don't let them get hot, because that's what's going to release the chemicals that you don't want. Speaking of that, I'll just say a word about nonstick cookware. There are some new generations coming out that are more non-toxic, but Teflon, well, let's just say that there's actually warnings on some pans not to heat them beyond a certain temperature if you have birds in the house. Ever heard about the canary in the coal mine? Birds would die if the coal mine was getting contaminated. Well, it doesn't take a coal miner to know that if it's bad for birds, it's probably bad for you too. Studies have found that most people in the routine use of pan frying, heat their pots and pans beyond the temperatures that are problematic. So it's highly recommended. You can use cast iron, you can use stainless steel, there's some new generations coming out now that are ceramic coated. And so if you're gonna use any kind of frying pan, strongly recommend that you get away from Teflon and the other typical non-sticks and use something greener, because your health's on the line here. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
There are many impediments for this whole process of better health in America, moving more plant-based, but the USDA subsidies have got to be, the biggest, most daunting possibility. And yeah. you and your father operate at a level, beyond me in terms of meeting with people and all. I mean, we have this crazy president, but he seems to sometimes do stuff, and I don't think he eats in a way that he's getting on the team. But, I mean, do you ever see a day that Iowa senators aren't going to dig in and, continue to destroy school programs and hospital, everything?
Well, there's the old saying that if the people lead, the leaders will follow. I hope so. That would be nice. It's true. The status quo is making certain interests very wealthy. And those are the interests that are funding the political status quo. And so it is the case that factory farmers, not so much the farmers, but the big companies to whom the factory farmers feel indentured, they pull the strings in politics to a tremendous extent. We have a farm bill in this country that funds the food stamp or SNAP program, and it also funds subsidies of the farming industry. Looking at the data over the last generation, we as taxpayers have provided hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies to our commodities crops, which are primarily corn and soy and wheat, a few others. Most of that is ultimately, at the end of the day, bringing down the price of high fructose corn syrup and factory farmed animal products and white bread. That's really where the calories are going. Studies found that less than 1% of our taxpayer money went to fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, the things we should be eating more of. So we're literally making it even harder for the poor to eat real healthy food. Twinkies has 14 subsidized ingredients in it. So if you ever wondered why Twinkies are cheaper per calorie than carrots, now you know, right? It's taxpayer subsidy. So what can we do? If we're going to subsidize anything, I think we should actually subsidize bringing down the price of healthy foods so they're more affordable for everybody. But what we have now is not even a free market. It's not even close to a free market. We've tilted the playing field in the wrong direction. So what can we do? Well, one of the things we can do is shift where we put our money, because when you fund broccoli farmers, when you fund farmers markets, when you fund the folks who are doing the right thing and making healthy food more accessible and affordable by offering it, you are helping to create marketplace demand. And right now, one of the things that gives me hope is that the organic foods industry is actually becoming a legitimate market force that actually has a seat at the table. A small seat, but a seat. Now, it's certainly not the majority yet, but it's growing, and it's actually speaking the language of economics. So I'm excited about that, and I want to fuel that. I would very much like to see a world in which our political leadership gets behind the values that I have and that we have and starts putting serious policy chops behind building a healthier world. 19% of our gross domestic product goes to medical care. We call it health care, but we all know it's actually disease symptom management. 19%. Starbucks spends more money on health insurance for its employees than it spends on coffee. We have a system that has become so expensive that we all complain about it, but at the end of the day, whether we blame Obamacare or we blame, the insurance industry or we blame big pharma, at the end of the day, as long as we're sick and as long as we're dependent on high-tech treatments to survive, it's going to cost an arm and a leg, so to speak, in order to keep us afloat. So I think that anybody with their head on straight can realize that it is in our best interests to prevent disease in the first place by promoting health. And only a very, very skewed and perverse system would favor the moneyed interests of the operators of factory farms over the health of an entire nation. But we are working for change. We are spreading the truth. We are creating a new food economy. The way I look at it, Food 1.0 is about survival. If you get enough calories to fill your belly, that's success. Food 2.0 is governed by commerce, makes the buying and selling of goods the central goal. and it's brought us an incredible array of flavors and textures and cuisines from all over the planet for amazingly low prices, but it's morally bankrupt. And Food 3.0 is about health. We make health the central organizing principle of our food system, and in Food 3.0 there's plenty of healthy profits. They just come from healthy food. So where I see us right now, a lot of us in this country, is making that transition from Food 2.0 to Food 3.0. And hopefully, as we stand for healthy food around the world, a lot of people can move from Food 1.0 to Food 3.0 without even stopping at Food 2.0 on the way. That's what I want to see. And, I don't have a lot of hope in this particular administration, not that I don't want to do what I can. The current Farm Bill proposal that's making its way through Congress right now is the worst we've seen as far as gutting any support for organic foods and favoring the super wealthy big mega farms even more, and even looking at GMO labeling, it's kind of eviscerating what little shred of GMO labeling we kind of have by creating exemptions for things like oils and sugars, and saying that companies can obviously just use the QR codes if they want to label GMOs, and other things that make so many loopholes that it's pretty sad. But we are working for change, and we're not, we may not see it in the short run, but Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but I believe it bends towards justice. And that's my take, and I think we're actually bending it really darn fast. Because we're creating a public groundswell of awareness and knowledge, and you know what? The worse things are, that's how much better they can be. So I think every problem is also an opportunity to step in with a solution. The status quo stinks, and it's killing us. But I think as we step forward, we also realize there's an incredible opportunity to change things for the better. So I actually have a lot of hope. Now, speaking about systemic change for a second, I want to tell you a story. A few years ago, there was a GMO labeling initiative in the state of Washington, and it was to mandate GMO labeling in Washington. And it ended up losing like 51% to 49%. But it was really, really close. And the campaign that wanted to stop this bill was funded entirely by out-of-state money. They raised about $30 million. $500 came from inside the state of Washington. And that was only because it was legally necessary to get on to actually have a campaign at all. And their money came almost entirely from the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which was a trade lobby. And the state campaign finance laws dictated that no company could back an initiative without being visible as to who they were. But all of the Coca-Cola and Monsanto and Nestle and Pepsi and a bunch of other companies were hiding. They were making multi-million-dollar contributions to fight this initiative, but they were hiding behind the Grocery Manufacturers Association. So they tried to sneak one through so no one would know that they were funding this. But campaign finance laws were breached, and the state attorney general wound up suing the Grocery Manufacturers Association. It was too late. The damage was done in the campaign. But afterwards, they leveled the largest campaign finance violation fines in national history. They fined the GMA so much money that it's now going out of business. When I heard this story, I thought to myself, how interesting. Coca-Cola doesn't want us to know that they're funding the fight against GMO labeling. Around that time, I was shopping in our local natural food store, and I picked up an Odwalla, which is a kind of smoothie. And my son, River, says to me, Odwalla is owned by Coke. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, do you want to give your money to Coke? And I was like, and I was kind of hot and kind of tired. And I was like, come on. I said, well, if Coke realizes there's money to be made in Odwalla, maybe they'll make better stuff. And he was like, so you want to give your money to Coke? I put that Odwalla back, wondering what kind of monster I had raised. And then it hit me. Coca-Cola doesn't, our members, Food Revolution Network members, don't buy a lot of Coca-Cola, but we do buy Odwalla. and Zico coconut water, and Dasani water, and vitamin water, and Honest Tea, and other brands that Coca-Cola owns. So we decided to launch a campaign calling on Coca-Cola to stop fighting GMO labeling. And we focused it with a boycott aimed at the natural brands that they owned. We said, hey, if you're going to profit from the natural foods industry, then you are now accountable to the natural foods industry, which means that your company is on record, and we see what you're doing, and we won't stand for it. So we wound up launching this national campaign. We got several 100,000 people on board, and we ended up reaching out to Coke. And we said to these folks, we said, hey, we think you're out of integrity with your mission, because you say you support consumer empowerment, and you say you support transparency. But here you are funding with millions of dollars, keeping us all in the dark about something that 90% of the American public wants to know, which is whether or not foods contain GMOs. So we wound up having meetings with them at the very highest levels, and then they said, hey, let's make this bigger. We ended up convening, this was very confidential at the time, but we convened leadership from many of the major corporate food industry leaders in this country, along with leadership from Center for Food Safety and Food Revolution Network and Consumers Union, which publishes consumer reports, and Environmental Working Group, and a bunch of other organizations. And we all came together in Washington, D.C. for a series of meetings over the course of about a year and a half. And the goal was to see if we could align around GMO labeling. And all these companies were telling us, we are sick and tired of feeling like we're on the wrong side of history, feeling like we're spending millions of dollars trying to fight the consumer right to know. But at the same time, we're afraid of a patchwork quilt of different laws in different states that would make it impossible for us to mass produce on a national scale. So we want a national solution. And of course, they wanted a national solution that wouldn't make GMOs look bad, or wouldn't hurt their bottom line. So we started trying to talk about solutions. And without spilling the beans on the details, I could say that we came up with an idea that they and we could all get behind. And we had attorneys crafting it, and it would have been the first time, I think, in the history of this country that like mega corporate food industry and the nonprofit and like food activists, food movement folks would have actually jointly stood for something in presenting it to Congress. And then the DARK Act passed, the Deny Americans Right to Know Act, that's what we call it, which essentially was a pretend GMO labeling solution nationally. And so all of our efforts kind of went out the window because it became voluntary. But I'll tell you something, they didn't go out the window in a couple of ways. One is that Mars and General Mills and a number of other companies began to voluntarily label GMOs, because out of our conversations they said, you know what, we still want to support the right to know even if we're not forced to. And we built relationships that continue to this day. And I learned something incredible, because I sat in that room with leadership from Nestle and Coca-Cola and Pepsi and the American Beverage Association and all these other brands, Mars, all these other brands that, I'll be honest with you, part of me at times had thought some not very nice things about these people. I mean, when I look at kids that are suffering from obesity and brain fog and ADHD and on the track to diabetes or even getting diabetes, when I look at, my own grandmother dying of Alzheimer's, and I look at a third of our seniors having Alzheimer's at time of death, when I look at the rates of suffering and disease, and I see these companies that are making these products, and I think that their fingerprints are on a lot of death, it's painful. And when I think about the children that are enslaved in the chocolate industry, and I know that there are 1 million kids right now who are not in school, they're enslaved, literally, in the Ivory Coast and Ghana, in the chocolate industry. And I know that Nestle doesn't directly want to support that, but I also know that their supply chain is funding it. There are parts of me that think some really not nice things about some of these folks as they try to market their products to our communities. But as I sat at that table, I heard people talking about ethics and integrity and values. And I knew that nobody stays up late at night wondering how they can exploit kids, wondering how they can kill people. These are folks who are themselves feeling like cogs in a machine that's trying to make money. And they're trying in some way to do something good, or at least something not so bad. None of them want to cause torture or suffering, but they feel like they're stuck, and they're trying to work within that system. And they had so much compassion for them. And I realized that we as consumers actually create the incentives so that these folks can go to their bosses and their shareholders and say, look, it's a business decision that we want to do the right thing. It's a business decision that we want a clean supply chain that doesn't torture animals or children. It's a business decision that we want to cut out the sugar and cut down on the processed crap in our products. Not that they would use that language. It's a business decision because the consumer cares. So you and I, when we choose plant-based food choices, are sending a message out to everybody in the food industry, whether they know it or not, whether they like it or not, to say there is money to be made in doing the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, you will pay the price for that. We're holding an industry accountable. And that gives me a lot of hope. Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to close with one other story, because I think I have to wrap up in a couple of minutes here. So this is a very personal story, actually. I'm a dad. I mentioned my son River a little earlier. The ocean refuses no river. So we have twins, actually. They're 17 years old. And they were born prematurely, 9 weeks early. And they have autism. So we're interacting with neurological diversity in our home on a regular basis. Now, why did they have autism? We could go on for some time trying to understand that. I can tell you that their grandmother, my wife's mom, was in Michigan when my wife was in the womb. And she was eating fish from Lake Michigan. And we know that there are birth defects and all sorts of neurological problems that can show up generations downstream. We also know that 90% of the people in Michigan during those very years in the mid-1970s were exposed to toxic chemicals from a PCB contamination that got spread through the meat industry when livestock were inadvertently fed the wrong feed. It actually was a toxic chemical that got mixed right in, and 90% of the people in Michigan were impacted. It was the largest such disaster in this country's history. We don't know, of course, of what's cause and effect, but my point is that we live in a contaminated world and that we do the right thing for our bodies and our health, not because it's some guarantee of perfection or ease or that we will never suffer, but because it helps to optimize our chances of health and wellness and because it helps us do the best we can with whatever comes into our lives. So our own kids are autistic, and sometimes that's been tough, sometimes it's been incredibly beautiful. They're my greatest teachers in life. And at the age of 10, they were not potty trained, and our son River, I'd never had eye contact with him. They didn't talk till they were past 5, and at the age of 10, I didn't know if they'd ever have social lives or functional lives at all. And we learned about a program called Sunrise, S-O-N-R-I-S-E, that focuses on building relationship with kids who are on the autism spectrum. And so I was practicing one of these principles, and one day our son River was chewing on a Barbie doll's foot, just sitting there chewing on her foot. And instead of worrying about how my kid's ever going to have a dating life if he chews on Barbie feet all day, or wondering about what kind of plastic he's ingesting, and since this Barbie was probably made in China, and yanking it out of his mouth and trying to punish him in some way for his behavior. Instead, I picked up a Barbie across the room from him, and I start chewing on her foot. And I decided I just want to join him in his universe. So now we're both sitting across the room from each other, chewing on Barbie feet. And at this moment, River looks up at me for the first time in his life, and he stared straight into my eyes, and he just started beaming. And I could almost hear him thinking, oh my God, there is intelligent life on this planet. So now we're looking in each other's eyes, chewing on Barbie feet. And then, after what felt like a blissful eternity, he gestures like this. His Barbie has 2 feet. He's inviting me to come chew on the other foot of his Barbie. So now I come over and we're like 3 inches apart from each other, beaming in each other's eyes. It was like first contact. And I started crying. And I felt like I was making contact with my son in a way for the first time in my life. And it's been an experience that's been repeated many times. Today, River still struggles sometimes, but both of our kids know how to use the toilet, and they don't chew on Barbie feet anymore. And, they're amazing. To me, they're miraculous. And I love them with all my heart. And they've taught me something profound about neurological diversity, about how every one of us is unique, and about how when we expect people to conform to our way of thinking and being and living, we become morally impoverished in the relationship. Martin Luther King said, "You have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt." When we judge people, when we pathologize people for not thinking or living the way that we do, we lose moral standing in that relationship. So what does this have to do with plant-based eating? Well, quite a bit, actually, because as you may have noticed, not everyone was at this conference this weekend. Not everyone in the world eats the way we do, or thinks the way we do, or cares about the things we care about. But if you want to have influence, if you want to make a difference in the lives of the people you love, if you want to share what you're learning in a way that actually influences the world around you, then one of the central principles to remember is that you approach every human being with respect for their sovereignty, their dignity, and their capacity to change. Because everyone wants to live. Most people want a livable world. Most people want a world in which animals are free from suffering, in which children and people of all ages and all stages and all classes have access to healthy food. Most people want a healthy future for future generations. And so as you participate in this movement, always remember that you are an ally to the values and the conscience and the dreams of people you love all over the world. Most of us don't act in our own best interests all the time. Most of us have bad habits, and most of us can learn. So thank you for learning, and thank you for acting.